Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
There are some believing that before you engage in a relationship, marriage, a partnership between two people, there should be therapy involved before that even begins. We're talking about couples therapy here, but certainly when a couple has challenges, it usually is the answer. Individual therapy and then potentially couples therapy. We're going to take that journey today. What does that look like? What's involved in couples therapy? Many times, both or one of the parties involved in the couple kind of shies away from that. Maybe it's because they feel uncomfortable or certain things will come up. He's somebody that helps people all the time improve their relationships, and he's an amazing psychotherapist. Dr. Barry Pilson is back with us today. Hey, Barry, how you doing?
Good, Steve. Thanks for having me back. I appreciate it.
Wonderful to have you back here. And this is just so important. And personally, in my journey, I do believe that before you engage in a relationship, getting married, all of that, couples therapy should be the precursor to a lot of that. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think that's a good idea. What I would like to do today is talk about the various processes involved in couple therapy, because it's a lot more complicated than people think. In fact, if you take the different types of therapy, individual, group, family, and couples usually in terms of outcomes, have the poorest outcomes, and that's because they're intensely emotional couples. You don't just have the two people in the room, but you have two people and all their issues, and you have the past, present, and it's very hard to differentiate stuff. So anyway, I hope today we can get at some of the processes that'll help sort that out a little better.
Certainly. And I have to believe many times in couples therapy that things come up that would not normally come up during a conversation with a couple. Do you encounter that a lot?
Yes. Anytime a couple walks in, and a lot of times they'll say, the opening question or the opening statement is, well, what's bringing you in? And invariably they will say, oh, communication is the problem. Okay. In fact, I would say about 80% of people, when they sit down, will say, oh, we have a problem in communication. The problem with that statement is that it's meaningful and it's meaningless. Okay. Usually what they mean by communication is a whole lot of other things. Again, emotional, where they're reacting to each other, and they're confused, and they're baffled. Now, there's certain tips. Let me just start off with that where to simplify communication. And often when somebody comes to couple therapy, a lot of times they'll start with this. Okay, so how do we communicate? Well, we communicate on many different levels all at one time. It's rational, it's irrational, like I said, and it's confusing. But anyway, a good communication involves just a couple principles. One is that you listen to the other person, you acknowledge what the other person says, and you validate what the other person says. Now that sounds good on paper. I can listen, I can acknowledge, and I can validate. But now you have to break that down further. Now listening, one of the quick tricks to listening is something called active listening, which probably most people have encountered at some point. Active listening simply means a lot of times that you'll state back what you've heard the person say. Okay, so that's active listening. It's simple, and it's not a bad way to communicate either. Okay, you just kind of repeat back what they said. That helps the person feel that you've acknowledged what they've said anyway. Now, whether you validate it or not, that's another issue.
Can I jump in here at
yeah,
this
yeah,
juncture? And absolutely on the active listening, even when you meet somebody for the first time, you should repeat their name. Hi, Barry.
Yes.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah.
After finding the name. And it helps validate in your mind as a remembrance of what their name is. Can you walk us through listening, the acknowledgement, and the validation? We could pick any situation. You and I are couples therapy. Barry, you always leave the dishes in the sink. Why can't you just take the next step and put them in the dishwasher? I'm picking any hypothetical situation.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
in that, where would the listening be, the acknowledgement, and the validation?
Okay, good, good. Well, the listening is repeating. Uh, I always leave the. You're telling me I'm always leaving the dishes in the sink. Now, here's a reflective part. I'm guessing that you're upset about that. Okay. All right. So
Yes.
that doesn't go, well, I don't always leave the dishes in the sink. That's not true. That would be the quick answer a lot of times. But
Yeah,
the
but you
the
do. They're
validation,
Barry, they're there. They're, I come down in the morning
yes,
and I see them and I don't see why you wouldn't just rinse them and put them in the dishwasher. It's 3 feet away.
right. So you see why it's important to acknowledge that the anger part of that, you feel angry, okay? Um, and when you feel angry, does that mean you don't feel like I care about you?
Mm.
Does that mean that you don't feel like I'm concerned about you? That would be see, that way you open up the dialogue. And those things, what I just said, does that mean that you don't care about, that you feel like you don't care about me? Does that mean you're angry? That's called reflective listening. You're sort of reflecting back to the person what their emotional component of what they're saying is. All
So
right.
in doing that, I hear you asking questions, and it's also said that one of the best things you can do is just ask questions. So you're asking me, am I angry about that? Do I have a challenge with that? Should it be should it be questions?
Well, that's a good question, actually, Steve, because if you notice what I said is, it seems like you're angry about that, okay? Or I'm hearing you say you're angry about that. I'm not really asking you a question. I'm trying to acknowledge that you're feeling that, okay? Now, in terms of communication, it's it's better if you can, not that you can never ask a question, but it's better to make a statement. When you make a statement, then the other person can make a statement back so that it doesn't become a question and answer kind of thing. You know, the summary of that is like a Q&A, question and answer. That's an interrogation. That's like a deposition, you see. That's what they do in
Mm.
legal circles when they're deposing somebody. When a prosecutor puts somebody on the stand, they're doing Q&A. That's not really a dialogue, okay? What you're doing is you're trying to process things in a way to get to your own agenda a lot of times. So you're asking questions. You're asking, quote, leading questions a lot of times. If you want to use the courtroom analogy, then the judge might say, well, that's a leading question. You can't ask that. But in a process with somebody else, if you're asking too many questions, you're not really listening or dialoguing. You're trying to get an agenda over. Okay.
Mm.
So
So
that's the issue.
is what I'm detecting here, it sounds like if you're asking questions, you may try to lead the other person in a certain direction. And I
That's
wasn't
right.
even thinking that in terms of asking questions. It was more of a fact-finding mission.
Yeah.
Apparently that makes you angry when I don't take the dishes out of the sink and put them in the dishwasher. Does it? You know,
Yes.
I never thought of it in that, and it can get very challenging.
Yes. Yes,
Hmm.
it can. And what you do is, if you can keep at statements, you can reflect back what the person is saying to you. Then you're dialoguing much more clearly, you see, at more than just the rational level. You're dialoguing at an emotional level. And that's what couple is about. You're trying in a couple process, whether it's a business partnership or a husband wife or even a parent child thing. You're trying to develop a cooperative partnership. That's what you're trying to do,
Hmm.
so that you're cooperating with each other. Ideally, the partnership is about having similar goals or similar visions about what we're trying to accomplish. So
So,
those are the main things about communication.
before we continue, validation was one of
Yes.
the principles of what we're talking about here, couples therapy. In the dishes in the sink analogy, how do we validate? How would the other person validate that situation?
Well, again, you would state at more than one level that it's not just about the dishes in the sink. It is about that, as well as the anger, as well as feeling like maybe somebody does. Then you have to separate that out. Does that mean you feel like I do more in the house than you do? Does that mean that you're not as you're not as concerned about how tidy the kitchen is? You know, am I a neater person than you are? You know, and that might be true. You know, everybody has different levels of what they kind of consider sloppiness or neatness. And it doesn't mean that you have to agree on that, but you have to validate that, yes, I can tolerate more disarray in the kitchen. You know, the other person might say my tolerance level for that type of disarray is anxiety producing. I don't like to go to bed with dishes in the sink. It upsets me. Okay, the other person, I don't care if there are dishes in the sink. You see, does that mean I'm right and you're wrong? Not really. It just means we have a difference. Now, if we're going to live together, if we're going to live, you know, if we're going to share the same kitchen, how do we address that?
Do you feel, and now I'm going to get a little deep here, and then we're going to move on.
Okay.
Do you
All right.
feel that many of these situations go back to our childhood? And we've talked about that before, that, yeah, let's say in the dishes in the sink scenario, that I may have an issue with you not taking the dishes out and putting them in the dishwasher because I feel that you're not listening to me. I'm not being heard. And that could go back to your childhood where, hi, dad, mom, I'm here. You're not even
Right.
listening to me. And now I've gotten triggered because of the dish. It could have been anything. It could have, somebody didn't empty the garbage can, could be whatever it might be. Is it often situations that really stem from our childhood that come up in these situations?
Well, that's that. It's yes, and it's other things too. Okay, it's yes. You know, I didn't feel validated. I didn't feel heard. I didn't feel seen. You know, that's an issue. That could be an issue from my childhood.
Sure.
But there's cultural issues with that too. There's gender issues with that. All right.
Mm.
There are racial issues with that. Okay. Am I seen? You know, uh, am I heard because I'm a different race? Am I seen? Am I heard because females or males in my dynamics are not listened to or not valued as much? Okay, so the validation has to do with what's valued and what's not valued. So not only is there a childhood issue of not being seen and heard, but there are cultural, social issues of not being seen or heard. You know, like a teenager, is screaming to be heard. Okay, and what's the quick answer? Well, I'm the parent, you're the child. You have
Mm.
to hear me.
Yep.
What I say is more important than what you say. And then we have that whole undercurrent of reactivity that goes on with that. Okay.
Well, it almost seems at that point where now you have a power struggle,
Yes.
and I'm sure
Yes.
that comes into play many times in the dynamics with a relationship.
Yes. Thank you, Steve. That's exactly where I wanted to go to. Actually, is are we dealing with a power struggle or a control battle or a competition between people? Okay.
Mm.
And quite frankly, if that's where the process is, if we're dealing with power and who's in control and who's in charge, and if we're competing against each other, then we're not going to have a cooperative partnership. You see, we're not going to connect very well. Somebody has to win and somebody has to lose. Well, obviously, if we got a win-loss situation, we're going to both lose. Of course, the ideal answer is how do we move into win-win? It's like with sales, okay? In sales, uh, what the process that works is win-win. Here's a service I have to offer. Here's a product I have to offer. You want it. It's necessary. And so we're going to have a win-win kind of process. And that's the same with couple. You have to move out of power struggles into a cooperative process. Okay. Then hopefully, by the way, the issue becomes, especially in a couple that like a male and female, or two males or two females, it doesn't matter, in an intimate relationship, then the issue becomes not who's in charge, but how close or how distant are we? Okay. And there
Mm.
might be conflicts about that. Okay. There might be one of the people is more comfortable with closeness, and the other one might be a little more comfortable with more distance. And that can be talked about and dealt with as well.
Does
Okay.
that go back to one of the fundamentals of the I'm trying to think about it, the um five love languages? Would that go back?
Yes.
Would that be in the
Yes.
same wheelhouse?
Yeah. It's the emotional part of what is validating to you, what is comfortable for you. How do you show love? Okay, do you show love by gifts? Do you show love by being there for somebody? Uh, do you show love by complimenting somebody? All right, um, and everybody can be a little bit different. And through the five languages of love, then hopefully what you're doing is acknowledging, how do we form closeness in a relationship, or how now, or the other side of that is creating distance sometimes, and this is what gets confusing. Might be a way that somebody has to protect themselves. Okay, now this is a whole other dynamic. If somebody has, or both of us have trauma in the relationship, or have trauma in our lives, the relationship may trigger fear and vulnerability. And so you protect yourself by distancing yourself. All right. Now, the most common
Ah,
thing about the most common thing of that is that one of the partners goes silent in the relationship. Okay. You'll hear that all the time. Oh, we're done talking. She stopped talking and didn't talk for hours, days, weeks sometimes. Okay. Now we're in some trouble. Okay, because the distance is now really impacting the connection between the two people.
I'm glad you brought that up because I was thinking that, and I thought at one point that we should address that because many times if one half of the couple says, "Hey, we should go to couples therapy," or we need to talk about this. We have a challenge
Yeah.
here. We need to talk about it. Then the other party says, I don't want later. Let's get to that later. The later never happens. They just kind of
Right.
push it under the rug. And then the challenge just festers and then just keeps growing and growing. What do you do in a situation like that?
Well, the one of the things is that most people come also to couple therapy. Again, here we go, with the idea that the therapist is going to be the judge. The therapist is going to figure out
Mm.
who's right and who's wrong. And there's often uh, a quick process where each of them are trying to get their case in front of the therapist to argue that they're right and the other one is wrong. Okay. All right. Now you have to break that down. As a therapist, you have to break that down pretty quickly,
Mm.
because if you're going to be if you're going to be the judge, if you're going to figure out who's right and who's wrong, I'll tell you one thing: you're going to lose as a therapist. Okay.
Is any of the party right or wrong? There is no right or wrong, I would think.
Well, that's the point. The point is there is no right or wrong. What we're trying to do is develop a space that in ways that we can talk about things in ways that somebody feels. Here we go again. Listen, acknowledge, and validate. And there's two principles that go with that. One of the principles is that which I just said, there's no right or wrong. And the other principle is that sometimes all problems don't have to be solved immediately. Okay, especially if you're in a long-term relationship with somebody. If you're in a long-term relationship, you don't have to solve every issue. Okay, uh, that because life goes on, and if it's not solved today, it doesn't mean everything's going to follow.
I
You have to
almost
sort.
view it as if the therapist in this situation is almost a mediator and almost like a traffic cop, where it's like,
Yeah.
okay, you go now, and then now, okay, all right, now stop, now you come ahead, let's go. And what I mean by that is being able to talk and being able to be heard by each other. It's almost like you're directing traffic. You're not saying, you know what, you're right about that. What? Listen, Why are you not taking the dishes out of the sink? Come on, it's never
Yeah,
that. It's more of
right.
you're just directing traffic.
That's right. And hopefully we can get to the other issues involved with that,
Sure.
of unfairness maybe, or betrayal, or
Mm.
whatever the underlying theme is, okay? And then if you can understand the underlying theme, ideally, you can understand what triggers that underlying theme in that particular person. You know, they feel, why do they, not why, but they may feel alone in the relationship. All right. And
Mm.
without blaming the spouse or the partner for feeling alone, you can talk about, I feel alone. And that, you know, that's the challenge that I bring for myself and for us. Okay. Uh, Another person may feel that they're being devalued or put down. Okay, uh, and that needs to be heard and seen, and then that becomes a challenge in the relationship as well as in the dialogue.
Now we have a couple of minutes left here. You
Okay.
mentioned the word themes. What are some of the
Yes.
themes in relationships?
Well, there are a variety of the biggest theme that sort of hits you, and it can hit you at different levels, is a theme of betrayal. All right. And I'll give you a quick example of a betrayal that everybody experiences. You go through, when you first meet somebody, when you're first involved with somebody, or you start to live together and everything, you might be in a honeymoon period, right? Where everybody is nice and everybody is cooperative and put your best foot forward.
Mm.
All right. Well, invariably, right, other parts of your personality, other parts of your experiences are going to come out, and all of a sudden it becomes, is this the person that I care about? Is this the person that I fell in love with? They seem very different. Now, you see, the issue there is at another level you felt betrayed by the person. Okay, it's not a betrayal in the sense of you just cheated on me, or you know lying to me about things. It's a betrayal in the sense of this person doesn't feel like they're the same person that I was talking to a year ago. Okay, so that's a big issue that really comes
Mm.
out in for a variety of ways.
So, question on that point,
Okay,
because it's often been said, you changed, or
right.
you're not the person I married. Is it reasonable to think in some situations that that isn't the same person?
Yes, it is reasonable. It is
Hmm.
reasonable. The more reasonable thing is now that you're getting to know the person much more completely and fully.
Well, I'm talking about, what you mentioned before, years, married to somebody 10 years, 12, 15,
Yes,
whatever it is, and then they do something um, that is just out of what you thought their character was, and maybe they continue to do that. So
yes.
we could say that, yeah, they did they change, or was that their core all along, and maybe you weren't aware of it?
That's often open up for debate. Okay,
Okay.
and look. After 10 years, people do change too.
Sure.
Okay,
Yeah.
and they get other interests and they develop differently, and different things can happen. I mean, it's again, it's whether it's a marriage, whether it's a business relationship. You know, you don't know what's going to happen 5 and 10 years down the.
Yeah, it is kind of scary when you enter into a partnership, whether it's business or marriage, whatever it might be, and people do change. I mean, I've heard that
Yes,
every 5 years we reevaluate our lives. Where am I? What am I doing? Why am I here? How
yeah,
did I get here? And I've often heard too, the 7 year itch
yes.
is
That
the additional 2 years there plus the five. It's because it takes you 2 years to take action, whether you're going to get out of the relationship, whether you're changing, whatever it might be. That's where the 7 year itch comes into play. I've heard that. I've talked to others. I've even tracked it in my own life. And interestingly, every 7 years, there was some type of significant change in different relationships. Coincidence,
yeah, that's a
maybe? I don't know.
no. I think that's a good point you're making about after 5 years or so as a benchmark.
Yeah,
We kind of evaluate. Maybe we do that automatically as humans, but you're making even a better point that then it takes 2 years to evaluate that.
right, right.
And
Yeah, because if you're married, kids, house, all of that, you're not going to
Yeah.
make a change right away. You got to process it, kind of wait and see. Great conversation today. This is so important in relationships. And Barry, you can work with people virtually, essentially anywhere on the planet. How do we find you?
Well, I have a website. You can contact me that way. It's barrypilsonphd.com.
And your last name is spelled how?
Pilson.
Great. Thank you for being here. Again, wonderful conversation, what we talked about. So essential. And looking forward next time we get together.
Okay. We'll continue next week. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you. We'll be right back.
Bye-bye.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
Mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house. And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned.
This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.